Hi, we're back, and I'm continuing on environmental aesthetics with Arnold berleant. So let's just continue here with this way that Berleant is wanting us to understand environmental aesthetics, okay? And so understand that with environmental aesthetics, we could start having the problem with all the misunderstandings that we have with defining nature, likewise landscape, also the environment as well. And so all of these general terms, nature, landscape, environment, also have religious, social, and traditional meanings that obscure our understanding or confuse us as well. And so, in other words, part of the problem with viewing nature aesthetically, and likewise we'll even say ethically, is the problem that we have understanding what what nature, landscape, and the environment actually are in the first place, right? Because we have problems of defining these factors, these elements, and these concepts, but we're rarely stopping to think, well, what exactly do we mean by nature, landscape, the environment, etc. So the point being that we could easily have misunderstandings because these are not clear, these general ideas are not clear to us, right? And so, in other words, for example, the word environment is derived from the French in and viron, meaning in circuit. So, in other words, a region that surrounds. So, even if we confuse the word environment with ecology and ecosystem, we rarely recognize our interdependence with nature. And so here we're starting to see that important word again that we noticed with Arnie and likewise with Aldo Leopold is that notion of interdependence as well, right? And so ecology in an environment is also understood as mutual interdependence. So we see ourselves usually as distinct from nature and in terms of the man-made versus nature, the artificial versus nature, etc. And so what Berleant is getting us away from is this binary understanding or this dualistic problem that we have. So in other words, we're still kind of continuing through the history of the aesthetics of nature or the environmental aesthetics on into the 20th century with Berleant's description. So in other words, on into the 20th century, we start seeing that people are confronting the way that we're understanding aesthetics of the environment in a much more in-depth and interdisciplinary way, right? So we have with the philosophers such thinkers that are emphasizing the pragmatic ways in which we understand the environment, along with the phenomenological, emplaced, and experiential ways in which we understand the environment, right? So also by way of quantum physics as well. So quantum physics has us getting to the very basic nature building blocks of what nature is to begin with, and showing us that there are ways that we're thinking that don't always accord to our metaphysical understandings of what reality is in and of itself as well. So quantum physics has us questioning how it is that we understand reality and hence nature itself, the universe itself as well, right? And so we are always, according to Berleant, wanting to favor a view whereby we're getting away from the presupposition that we're somehow separate, right? So in other words, we're thinking of the problem of a dualism that positions us as separate and other than nature. So we want to get away from that, right? And the 20th century thinkers have started dislodging us from that notion of this dualism, mind-body dualism, likewise man-nature dualism as well, right? So showing that we're recognizing nature as a unified field of animate and inanimate objects in a spatial and causal biosystems that are also affected by human activity, right? So in other words, human activity is a way that nature is understood in and of itself, right? So also along with the naturally occurring phenomena of an ecosystem, right? And so again, the emphasis is on mutual interdependence. So yet the notion of a landscape known by the geography still could be narrow enough where we just start thinking of the Earth's surface as it extends from the viewer's eye to the horizon, right? So we might just think of it in terms of, we might think of aesthetic appreciation in terms of a beautiful horizon. But yet, in the same sense, what that does is it also could be narrowing down our aesthetic appreciation to just the visual, right? So scenery seen from a single view, or thinking of the landscape as just a panoramic element to take a picture of, right? So in other words, a panoramic landscape isn't just reduced to the visual alone. There's more to the landscape than just our visual perception. Although visual perception is important, it still is not the only way in which we perceptually engage with the environment, well, right? So our engagement with the environment must be understood as immersive. And so having a strong sense of immersion as opposed to separateness, okay? So the separateness in the separateness in the way we traditionally understand the environment is something that Berleant is wanting us to get out of, okay? And so in other words, we have the idea that we're moving from the dichotomy of nature and culture and showing that environmental aesthetics is getting us to bridge the gap between nature and culture experientially. And so bridging the gap between nature and culture also gets us to start thinking of the way in which we're working by way of our design. So by way of design, we are articulating our sustainability. And so we mean design there in the broadest sense of the word. In other words, the way in which we're problem solving and understanding our problem solving as an interaction with nature, and likewise also learning from our mistakes, going back to the drawing board, etc., as a way to understand how we can be sustainable with nature and human interaction. So in other words, that bridging that gap of the perceptual way in which we're understanding our environment can help us get a better grasp on how it is that we're designing our future as well with the environment in terms of economics, commercial development, engineering, science, biotechnology, so on and so forth, right? That design has all those creative venues for growth in the way that we are working with nature as opposed to against nature or contrary to nature. So when we see ourselves as separate and we see our interaction with nature as separate, that's where we start running into problems, is the idea, right? And so we could also not only think of that dualism as the problem, but also problems of quantification as well. That in other words, quantifying nature in terms of economic value, so on and so forth, or scientific value, still is too narrow of a focus, because we also want to start appreciating the qualities of nature, the qualities of the natural world that help us also to be better people, right? And to be more in communion with nature as well in our experiences, right? Because landscape and architecture and also urban aesthetics have a reciprocal relation with the natural world. So even as you look around me, even the space that I'm in, it has aesthetic considerations given to it as a way to show that this is a way that we're working with nature. In other words, a way that this landscape is working with nature is by having the windows here to let the natural light in. And then likewise, there's the incorporation of steel for its strength. And then likewise, the bricks are made from stone as well, and also natural materials. So in other words, architecture, the man-made landscape, is also involved with nature in the way that it's working. And so the example of me presenting this lecture here in this building is also a way of working with nature, right? In other words, I'm getting out of the wind as a way to as a way to be clearer when I'm talking. In other words, I don't want the wind to be a disturbance, and architecture is helping me with that, right? Because architecture is also a mediation with nature, okay? And then so we also have what else do we have? Oh, I think that's it. So why don't we call it a close there and continue our discussion, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.